The mockery begins. The galaxy was a place of power and pride. For centuries, the alien species that ruled it believed they were the strongest. From the vast and ancient Shurians to the aggressive and technologically advanced Genix, they had seen many species rise and fall. But among them all, there was one species that they could not take seriously: humans. Humanity was young, just beginning to explore the stars. They were not as advanced as the Genix, nor as fierce as the Corax, yet they still dared to make their presence known. To the other species, this was laughable. They had only just begun to stretch their legs in the galaxy, while the others had long since conquered entire star systems. The thought that humans could pose a real threat was, to them, ridiculous. Inside the Genix Empire's Grand Council Hall, an important meeting was underway. The representatives from various species had gathered to discuss the future of the galaxy. The topic on the table was humanity. Some of the more powerful races were worried. They had seen humanity's first steps into the cosmos. They had heard about the human ships, their small colonies, and their impressive technological achievements. But to most, it was all a joke. An elder Genix warlord, Commander Kothar, sat at the center of the room, his piercing yellow eyes scanning the gathered species. "Do we really need to discuss these humans any longer?" he asked, his voice thick with disdain. The other commanders nodded. Their laughter filled the room. One of the younger Genix officials leaned forward, a sneer on his face. "I don't see why we even bothered sending a fleet to their little homeworld," he said. "Their ships are nothing compared to ours. They are still so weak, so primitive. What can they possibly do against us?" The room erupted into laughter again. But it wasn't just the Genix. The Shurians, an ancient species known for their wisdom and long lifespans, also shared in the mockery. Their representative, a tall, thin alien with glowing blue skin, let out a chuckle. "Indeed, they are no threat. I would be surprised if they even know how to defend themselves properly in space." The Corax, fierce warriors who ruled several sectors of the galaxy, joined in as well. Their representative, a hulking alien with jagged teeth and a battle-scarred face, grinned. "I'll say this, their ships are slow. I bet they'll be easy to destroy." The laughter continued. The humans, it seemed, were the joke of the galaxy. Yet the leaders had no idea how dangerous their mockery was. They didn't know what humanity had been building. They didn't understand the strength that ran through the veins of humankind. Across the galaxy, in the quiet corners of human space, the Resolute was being prepared. A massive warship, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It had been under construction for years. It was humanity's first true warship, a symbol of their strength, resilience, and determination to stand tall among the stars. The Resolute was a ship built not just to defend, but to dominate. It had weapons that could rip through the toughest of alien armor. It had shields that could withstand the harshest of attacks. And its crew, they were unlike any the galaxy had ever faced. As the council meeting continued, oblivious to the storm that was about to break, humanity's warship was nearly complete. But still, the galaxy mocked. "If they are so strong," one of the Shurians said, "let them come and show us. Let them come and prove they are anything more than an amusing little species with big dreams." The comment was meant to be sarcastic, a final poke at humanity's ambition. The galaxy thought of humanity as nothing more than a child trying to play in a universe of giants, but they would soon learn how wrong they were. Back on Earth, in the heart of the human fleet's command center, General Hargrave stood staring at the star charts. His eyes narrowed as he read the reports coming in from their scouts. The galaxy had no idea. Humanity was about to show them that their laughter was misplaced. "We've been underestimated," General Hargrave muttered to himself, a small smile crossing his face. But not for much longer. With that, he turned to his officers. The time had come. Humanity's warship was ready, and they would send a message to the galaxy, one they would never forget. The council meeting on the Genix homeworld continued, the laughter still echoing in the grand hall. The Xenix representatives mocked humanity, joking about how easily they would crush their warships when the time came. They spoke as if there was no way that such a small species could ever truly challenge their might. But far away, in a hidden corner of the galaxy, the Resolute was quietly moving into position. It was ready. The humans had their warship, and it was more than just a weapon. It was their declaration to the universe. They would not be laughed at. They would not be ignored. They would rise. And the galaxy would never forget the day they laughed at humanity. The galaxy was about to face something they hadn't even begun to understand. And the mocking would soon stop. The galaxy had laughed. They had mocked humanity, calling their warship a foolish attempt to play with the big leagues. They never expected what was coming. The Resolute, a human warship like no other, was silently leaving its homeworld, Earth, to set course for the heart of the galaxy. The commanders of the Xenix, the Shurians and the Korix had no idea. They continued to plan their next moves, their next invasions, their next battles. Humanity was still just a joke in their eyes. But the moment that the Resolute entered orbit around a distant planet, the galaxy would wake up to the nightmare they had overlooked. On board the Resolute, General Hargraves stood in the command center. His eyes were locked on the vast starfield stretching out before him. The crew around him worked in silence, their faces serious, determined. This was not just a mission. It was a statement. "Prepare for activation," Hargrave ordered. The officers around him nodded, quickly following his commands. The immense ship's systems began to hum, lights flashing, engines roaring to life. The Resolute was no ordinary ship. It was a masterpiece of human engineering, a blend of advanced technology and raw power that no one had ever expected. Built for one purpose, to show the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. Outside, the planet's atmosphere seemed calm. Yet, the sensors on the Resolute were picking up something strange. As the ship's weapon systems powered up, the fleet's sensors began to notice small movements in the galaxy around them. "Something's off," one of the crew members muttered, staring at the console in front of him. General Hargraves' face hardened. He turned to his officer. "Activate the sensors. We need to know exactly who's out there." The officer worked quickly, activating the ship's deep space scanners. The data began pouring in, showing various fleets in the area. There were Xenix ships, ready for another raid. There were Korak fleets, preparing to invade unprotected colonies. And there were Surian war vessels, cruising through deep space as they always did. But there was one fleet that caught Hargraves' attention. It was massive. Over a dozen ships, each one more advanced than any fleet humanity had ever seen. It was a Xenix battle group, moving in formation. They were unaware of the Resolute. "Lock on their lead vessel," Hargrave ordered. "Target it with full power." The crew scrambled to obey. The Resolute's weapon systems charged, the heavy cannons of the ship focusing on the lead Xenix warship. The weapons were massive, capable of decimating entire fleets with a single strike. Humanity had built this warship to be their sword, their shield, and their message. The Xenix had no idea what was coming for them. Outside, the Xenix fleet continued their course, oblivious to the Resolute that loomed just out of sight. On their command ship, Commander Kothar, the same warlord who had mocked humanity in the council hall, stood in front of a large map. He felt confident. He always did. His fleet was unmatched in its strength. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was off. He walked over to a console, where one of his officers was monitoring their sensor readings. "What's wrong?" Kothar demanded. The officer's face was pale. "Sir, we're picking up an unknown signature. Something massive, moving at high speed, just outside our sensors. We can't get a clear reading." Kothar's eyes narrowed. "Another ship. Impossible. We're in the heart of Xenix space. No one should be out here." His officer hesitated, glancing at the screen again. "It's human. It's reading as a human vessel." Kothar laughed. "Humans? What can they possibly?" Before he could finish his sentence, the Resolute fired. The shot ripped through the darkness of space like a streak of light, hitting the Jinx flagship directly. The explosion was blinding. The ship's shields didn't even register the hit. The energy from the blast tore through the Jinx vessel, and within moments, it was no more. The once proud flagship of the Jinx fleet was reduced to nothing but debris and scattered wreckage. The sudden attack sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Jinx fleet, now without their leader, was thrown into chaos. Panic spread like wildfire among their ranks. They had never encountered anything like this, never expected a human ship to be capable of such a powerful strike. General Hargrave stood stoically in the command center of the Resolute, his expression unreadable as the Jinx fleet fell into disarray. "Target the remaining ships," he commanded calmly. "Finish what we started." The officers worked quickly, locking onto the remaining Jinx vessels, their weapons now ready to strike. The Resolute wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol, and as its massive cannons fired again, sending another Jinx ship into oblivion, the galaxy began to understand. Humanity wasn't a joke. The mockery was over. The terror had begun. The Resolute wasn't just a warship, it was a declaration. The galaxy had laughed at humanity for far too long. And now, with every blast of the ship's weapons, they would pay the price for their arrogance. Humanity's warship had arrived, and it was here to stay. The rest of the galaxy would soon feel the weight of that truth. The silence that followed the Resolute's devastating strike was unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. The once powerful Jinx fleet, now scattered and decimated, was just the beginning. No one could believe what had just happened. Across the galaxy, news spread quickly. The once confident fleets of the Korax, the Surian warlords, and countless other races heard the chilling reports. A human warship had appeared from nowhere, and in mere moments, it had destroyed a fleet twice its size. And now, it was moving toward them. Commander Cawthor's final moments had been broadcasted across the galaxy. His last words, filled with shock and disbelief, echoed in every ship's communication system. We are not ready for this." In the distant corners of the galaxy, other races began to panic. The Jinx had always been seen as a dominant force, unbeatable and feared by all. Their sudden defeat at the hands of a human vessel shattered everything. If humans were capable of this kind of destruction, what else could they do? The Surian Council convened immediately. The room, filled with the galaxy's most powerful leaders, was tense. Ambassador Laura stood at the front, her expression one of disbelief. She could barely bring herself to speak. "The humans have a weapon we never imagined. How did they develop such technology? How can we fight it?" The other leaders murmured amongst themselves, each one processing the terrifying news in their own way. The Korax were known for their aggressive raids, but even they had never encountered an enemy like this. The very thought of a human warship that could wipe out entire fleets was enough to send chills down their spines. "We cannot let this continue," Admiral Valrose of the Korak Empire spoke up, his voice low and dangerous. "If we don't act now, it will be too late. The humans have shown us that they can destroy us with ease. They must be stopped." Laura nodded slowly. "But how? We don't know the full extent of their capabilities. That ship destroyed a fleet in a matter of minutes. What are we up against?" "We need to find out more about the Resolute," a Surian strategist said, his eyes scanning the room. "We need to understand its weaknesses, its technology, and how it was built." The galaxy's leaders knew they had only one option. They would have to assemble a force, a coalition of every major military power, to stop the Resolute and humanity from spreading any further. The stakes were too high, and the fear was too great. Meanwhile, the Resolute continued its march across the galaxy, undeterred by the chaos it had already caused. General Hargrave stood at the front of the command center, staring out into the vastness of space. His expression was calm, though inside he could feel the weight of what they had just done. "We have sent our message," he said quietly to his crew. "Now, we wait." For hours, there was nothing. The silence in space was deafening. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath, unsure of what would happen next. Would the rest of the galactic powers rally against humanity, or would they cower in fear? Suddenly, the ship's sensors picked up several new ships. Large, heavily armed vessels on an intercept course. The time for waiting was over. The galaxy was about to make its move. Hargrave's eyes narrowed as he observed the approaching fleets. These were not small groups. This was a full-on coalition. The Korriks, the Surian warlords, and even the Jinniks had rallied their forces to fight the Resolute. "Get ready," Hargrave commanded, his voice steady. "We've made our presence known. Now we show them what humanity is capable of." As the enemy fleets closed in, the Resolute began to power up. Its massive engines roared to life, and its weapon systems hummed with energy. This would not be an easy battle, but humanity was ready. Hargrave had trained his crew for this very moment. They would not back down. Outside, the coalition forces took up their positions. They had learned from the destruction of the Jinniks fleet and were preparing for an all-out war. The fleet of warships, led by their finest generals, was ready to engage humanity's warship head-on. But as they prepared to make their move, something strange happened. The Resolute didn't rush into battle like they expected. Instead, it slowed down, almost as if it was waiting for them. "Hold your fire," one of the enemy commanders ordered. "They're giving us space." "Why?" There was a long pause as the fleets of the galaxy tried to figure out what was happening. Then, without warning, the Resolute fired a single shot. The blast ripped through space with a force so powerful that it shook the very fabric of reality. The energy from the blast slammed into the nearest enemy warship, tearing it apart in an instant. The shockwave from the explosion sent the remaining ships into a panic. The once organized fleet scattered, their morale shattered. General Hargrave stood tall as he watched the chaos unfold. "This is humanity's strength. We don't need numbers. We have the power of will and technology on our side." The moment that the shot was fired, the galaxy's perception of humanity changed forever. It was no longer a matter of if humanity could win. It was a matter of when. The tide had turned, and the coalition forces knew that they were facing a war they could no longer win. The Resolute wasn't just a ship. It was the beginning of humanity's rise. And now, the galaxy would know that humanity would not be silenced again. The explosion that tore through space left the coalition forces in complete disarray. The once united fleet, prepared to fight against the Resolute, now found itself scattered in confusion and fear. The shockwave from the blast had crippled the nearest ship, its hull twisted and smoking, drifting in the void. The remaining enemy warships tried to regain their bearings, but their morale had been shattered. They had never faced a weapon like the one humanity now possessed. Admiral Valros of the Korrik Empire stood at the helm of his flagship, his face a mixture of disbelief and rage. His fleet was not only outclassed by the Resolute's technology, but it had been humiliated in front of the entire galaxy. He slammed his fist against the command console, his anger boiling over. "Reorganize. Get the fleet back into formation," he bellowed. But no matter how quickly the ships attempted to regroup, the fear of the Resolute's power had already taken hold. The fleets had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. No one knew how to fight something so advanced, so powerful. Even with their combined forces, they were nothing against the might of the human warship. Meanwhile, aboard the Resolute, General Hargrave watched the enemy ships struggle to reorganize. His face remained calm, almost stoic, as his crew prepared for the next phase of their mission. The crew had anticipated this reaction. The overwhelming fear from the enemy was exactly what they needed to ensure victory. "We have them on the defensive," Hargrave said to his crew. "Now we push forward. Don't let them regain their confidence." The crew nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The Resolute was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of humanity's resilience and strength, a force that would not be easily defeated. As the enemy fleets tried to regroup, Hargrave gave the order. Target their largest ships. Disable them first. Let's send them a message they won't forget. The Resolute's weapon systems powered up once more, and the ship's massive guns fired with precision. The beams of energy tore through the void, striking the enemy ships with deadly accuracy. A massive Korak dreadnought was the first to fall, its shields flickering before collapsing under the onslaught. The ship exploded in a burst of light, its destruction sending a shockwave across the battlefield. One down, Hargrave muttered, his voice low. But the battle was far from over. The remaining enemy ships hesitated, unsure of how to react. Some attempted to retreat, while others tried to fire back. But they were no match for the Resolute. Its advanced technology and unmatched firepower overwhelmed the coalition forces at every turn. The once proud fleet was now crumbling, and the survivors were left scrambling for any chance of survival. Admiral Valros watched in horror as his ships were picked off one by one. He had never seen anything like it. The humans had come out of nowhere, and now they were dismantling his entire fleet without breaking a sweat. He could feel his grip on the situation slipping away. "This is impossible," he shouted, his hands trembling. "We cannot fight this. We must retreat." But even as he gave the order to fall back, he knew it was too late. The human warship was too powerful, and his forces were too disorganized to mount a successful defense. The Resolute's weapons fired again, and the once formidable Korak fleet began to break apart. Another ship was torn in half by a precise shot, and several smaller vessels were sent spinning into space, their engines powerless. "Admiral, we can't hold out much longer," one of his officers said, panic in his voice. "We need to retreat now, or we'll all be destroyed." But Valros' pride wouldn't let him. He had led the Korak Empire for decades, and the thought of retreating from a fight was unthinkable. His fingers tightened around the command console, and he gritted his teeth. "No," he spat. "We fight until the end. We will not let these humans think they can take us down so easily." The battle raged on, but it was clear that the Resolute was in control. The human warship moved with incredible precision, its weapons striking with deadly accuracy. It seemed as though there was no escape for the coalition forces. Every attempt to regroup was met with overwhelming force. Then, the unimaginable happened. A sudden surge of energy pulsed from the Resolute. The ship's main weapon powered up, its energy field crackling with power. A blinding flash filled the space around them, as the Resolute unleashed a blast of unimaginable force, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The blast hit several coalition ships at once, their hulls crumpling like paper under the sheer power of the energy. The Resolute had just demonstrated its most terrifying weapon yet. It wasn't just a warship, it was a force of nature. The blast had completely wiped out the largest remaining fleet, leaving nothing but debris floating in space. Admiral Valros stared at the screen in disbelief. His fleet was gone. The humans had wiped them out without mercy. "We're finished," he whispered, his voice hollow. "This battle is lost." The surviving ships of the coalition turned and fled, their once proud fleets shattered by the human warship. The remaining enemy forces scattered, unable to stand against the might of the Resolute. The galaxy had just witnessed the power of humanity, and it was unlike anything they had ever imagined. As the last of the coalition ships retreated into the depths of space, the Resolute stood victorious. Humanity had just shown the galaxy that they were not to be underestimated. And with that, a new era had begun. The Resolute had proven that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and no one, not even the most powerful empires of the galaxy, could stand in their way. The battle had ended, but the silence that followed was deafening. The void of space was calm again, but the devastation left in its wake was impossible to ignore. The once powerful fleet of the Korak Empire, the alliance of various galactic species, had been crushed in a matter of hours. The Resolute remained, its massive form dominating the empty space where countless ships once lingered. Inside the human warship, General Hargrave walked across the bridge, his boots echoing in the otherwise quiet command center. The victory was complete, but there was no joy in it. Hargrave knew this was only the beginning. The message had been sent, loud and clear. Humanity was no longer a species to be taken lightly. "Report," Hargrave said, his voice steady, but there was a tension in the air. "Sir," the communication officer replied, "we've received reports from across the fleet. The Coalition's remaining ships have scattered. There's no sign of any organized resistance. The enemy is retreating to their borders, but they're in disarray." Hargrave nodded, his mind already turning to the next phase. The galaxy had just witnessed the power of humanity, but they would need more than just victory to ensure their place in the galaxy. Humanity had proven their strength, but there would be consequences. "What's the situation on the Korek flagship?" Hargrave asked. "We have their flagship in our sights, sir," the tactical officer responded. "It's heavily damaged but still operational. They're trying to flee, but they're too slow. We have them cornered." Hargrave stared at the display, where the large Korek flagship loomed on the screen. It was a broken shell of its former self, but it was still a symbol of the Empire's might. The Resolute had left them with no chance of escape, and Hargrave knew that the galaxy was now watching every move they made. "Prepare a message to the Korek leadership," Hargrave said, his tone hardening. "Tell them that humanity is watching, and they will not be given mercy. We will ensure they understand that their Empire's time has passed." The officer nodded, immediately getting to work. Hargrave had no interest in sending a message of mercy. This was about establishing dominance, about making it clear to every empire in the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the leaders of the defeated forces watched in silence. They had underestimated humanity, and now they paid the price. In the command centers of the other empires, diplomats and generals convened, trying to assess the new reality they faced. The Resolute's devastating power was not something they could simply ignore. "How did they do it?" muttered Emperor Zarkin, the ruler of the Veronar Dominion, as he watched the footage of the battle. How could such a young species build a ship like that? He wasn't the only one asking that question. Across the galaxy, countless leaders were scrambling to understand the technology of the Resolute. They had never encountered anything like it before. Its power, its weapons, its sheer size. The ship seemed invincible, and that terrified them. But despite their fear, there was a sense of disbelief. Humanity was a young species, only recently discovered by the greater galaxy. They had no ancient alliances or vast resources like the older species. How could a race like that, one so new to the stars, build something that could tear through entire fleets with ease? Back aboard the Resolute, Hargrave continued his assessment of the situation. He knew this victory would bring more challenges, but for now, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. His mission had been accomplished, but the war wasn't over. The galaxy would need time to digest the events that had unfolded. "General," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was his communications officer again. "We've intercepted a transmission from the Korek Empire. They're requesting a ceasefire. They're willing to negotiate." Hargrave's lips twisted into a grim smile. The Korek had been proud, unyielding even in the face of overwhelming odds. Now, they were pleading for mercy. It was a powerful statement of humanity's strength, but Hargrave wasn't ready to offer them an easy way out. "Tell them," Hargrave began, his voice cold and firm, "that the time for negotiations has passed. Humanity doesn't make deals with those who underestimate us. They will either surrender completely or face total destruction." The communication officer hesitated, but then nodded. "Understood, sir." The orders were given, and the Korek Empire would be forced to make its choice. The galaxy would soon learn that humanity did not seek power for power's sake, but they would not hesitate to use their strength when pushed. The Resolute had proven that, and Hargrave was determined to ensure no one forgot it. As the communication channels went silent, Hargrave stared out at the stars. The Resolute had become more than just a ship. It was a symbol, a harbinger of a new era. Humanity had arrived, and their enemies had learned the hard way that underestimating them was a fatal mistake. The aftermath of the battle left the galaxy reeling. Leaders would meet in secret, alliances would shift, and the balance of power would never be the same. One thing was certain: humanity's warship had made its mark on the galaxy, and the terror it had spread would echo across the stars for generations to come. The galaxy had been shown what humanity was capable of, and nothing would ever be the same again. The galaxy was a much quieter place in the days that followed. The Resolute hovered in orbit, a silent sentinel over the remains of the defeated Korak fleet. Inside the massive ship, the crew carried out their duties as if nothing had changed. But the truth was that everything had. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and every empire, large and small, was left wondering what would happen next. General Hargrave sat alone in his private quarters, staring out at the stars. He had seen many battles, many victories, but this felt different. The Resolute had done more than just crush the enemy. It had sent a message. Humanity was no longer a species to be dismissed or overlooked. Their warship had proven that. Yet, even as the crew celebrated their triumph, Hargrave knew that there was still much to be done. The Korak Empire had been dealt a crushing blow, but the galaxy was vast, and there were others out there who might think they could challenge humanity. They were wrong, of course, but that didn't stop them from trying. The massive, strange ship loomed closer, its shape shifting and undulating in ways that defied all logic. The Resolute and its crew were now on edge, the tension palpable as the two ships approached each other in the vast emptiness of space. General Hargrave stood on the bridge, his hands gripping the console as he watched the unreadable alien ship on the view screen. The crew was silent, each of them waiting for Hargrave's next move, unsure of what to expect. It was a strange sensation, this feeling of powerlessness. The Resolute was humanity's greatest weapon, a warship capable of turning the tide of battles. Yet here it was, facing an enemy that made no sense at all. The ship before them wasn't just technologically advanced. It felt like it was from a time long before the galaxy had even begun. A sentient ship, one that didn't simply travel through space, but seemed to bend it. Suddenly, the ship's dark, shimmering surface pulsed, and the entire bridge of the Resolute was filled with a deep, resonating hum. The hum grew louder and louder, vibrating through the floor and walls, and the crew winced at the sound. It wasn't a noise. It was felt. The sound was not coming from speakers or instruments, but directly from the ship itself. The feeling was not just unsettling, it was unnatural. The crew felt as though their very bodies were being pulled towards the alien vessel. Hargrave's mind raced as he realized the ship wasn't just approaching them. It was communicating. Not in words, not in visual signals, but through sheer presence. It was sending a message, an invitation, or perhaps a challenge. "General, we're receiving a strange signal," the communications officer said, breaking the heavy silence. His voice was shaky, but there was no hiding the curiosity mixed with fear in it. It's like nothing we've ever seen. There's no language, no code. It's just a pulse. "On screen," Hargrave ordered. The crew turned their attention to the view screen, where the alien ship's surface shimmered in a way that almost looked like a living organism. A strange pattern of light began to pulse in time with the hum they had been hearing, and it was clear that the ship was now fully aware of their presence. Hargrave had seen a lot in his career, but nothing like this. His fingers tapped the controls nervously, unsure of how to respond. "Can we send a message back? Try to communicate?" he asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. The communications officer nodded hesitantly. "We can try, but we're not sure what kind of response we'll get." Hargrave considered the options. They had no choice but to attempt some form of communication. To ignore the alien ship might be worse than attacking it outright. "Send a standard greeting," he said, his voice firm despite the nerves that buzzed beneath the surface. "Let's see if we can make contact." The officer typed quickly, sending out a simple, basic transmission. This is General Hargrave of the Resolute. We are humanity's first contact with your species. We wish to understand you and your intentions." The seconds stretched out into eternity as they waited. The crew held their collective breath, each of them aware that their next actions could change the fate of the galaxy forever. Suddenly, the strange ship pulsed again. This time, the hum grew more intense, and the lights on the bridge flickered. The room went dark for a moment, and when the lights returned, the view screen had changed. Instead of just the alien ship, an image appeared, an image of the galaxy itself, swirling and shifting in space. The crew stared at the image in awe, but there was something disturbing about it. The image wasn't just a map of stars or planets, it was a pattern. The stars and galaxies seemed to rearrange themselves, forming shapes and symbols that couldn't be understood. Yet there was one thing that stood out: the Resolute, floating in the middle of the galaxy, surrounded by the pulsing lights of the alien ship. The alien ship was examining them. Before anyone could speak, the image shifted again. This time, the strange vessel's surface shimmered once more, and a low, deep voice filled the air, filling the room with a feeling of ancient authority. "You are not what we expected," the voice said, its tone dark and echoing, as though it came from the very fabric of space itself. Hargrave's heart raced, his mind scrambling to keep up. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Why are you here?" The voice spoke again, colder this time. "We are the observers. We have watched your kind from the beginning. We waited to see if you would rise or fall." There was a pause, and for a moment, Hargrave could only hear the pounding of his own heartbeat. The crew waited in silence, watching the view screen as if it held the answers to everything. "Why did you show yourself now?" Hargrave asked, his voice steady despite the fear crawling beneath his skin. "Because you have made your move," the voice responded. "Your warship has arrived, and with it, your true potential. The galaxy is changing." The screen flickered once more, and the image of the galaxy twisted into a single point of light. Hargrave's mind raced as he understood the meaning. The galaxy was no longer the same. With humanity's warship, the balance had shifted. The battle was only just beginning. "Prepare yourself, human," the voice echoed one last time. "You have awoken something that cannot be undone." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in total silence. Hargrave stood frozen, his mind reeling with what he had just heard. The alien ship, no, the observers, had been watching humanity from the very beginning. And now that they had made their move, the galaxy was no longer just a place of conflict. It was a place of reckoning. As Hargrave turned to face his crew, he knew one thing for sure. The war was no longer just about survival. It was about defining what humanity would become in the face of forces far greater than they had ever imagined. And it had only just begun.